if the free trial expired and we are still paying up to date, then poor countries financing richer countries by about 3 trillion annually. You know, we talk about climate change, and poor countries are actually drilling oil, and we are talking about heating up the planet. So we are heating up the planet to actually pay people who can actually already sustain themselves. Then Global South spends about 12.5 times more on debt than on climate action, actually. And in 2024, developing countries paid 921 billion in net interest on public debt. So if you ask me, the governance structure of the IMF was actually developed back in about 8 years ago. And perhaps that's the same time my grandmother was born. I can tell you for a fact that we've since refurbished the house we built for my grandmother. So I don't know why we're still working under the same governance structures and paying IMF under the same governance structures. I want to move fast because this is quite a long deck. And the inequities in global financial system mean that the terms and conditions vary by country. In particular, low and middle income countries have less power in international financial markets that are skewed in favor of private creditors. Actually, the global south, and when I say the global south, I'm speaking about largely even African countries. When we go and borrow from these international multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF, and other, global creditors, we pay about 9 times more interest than what, for instance, US, Britain, any other developed nation actually pays. So it's akin to, for instance, I come to the hospital, you look at me, and you realize I'm very sick because most of these nations in the global south are actually poor. Then, on the basis that I'm very sick, you decide that you're going to charge me more than the person who is relatively or less sick, which actually doesn't make sense. And these inequalities are actually structural. You can see that they started with ongoing legacies of colonialism, then power imbalances in global financial and economic governance. I've talked about that years ago. And then you can see that private creditors' dominance, they hold a significant amount of global south debt. So the Paris Club, for instance, we don't only owe debt to World Bank, IMF, the other private lending institutions that we're actually still paying debt to. And they impose high litigation costs, leveraging costs in jurisdictions like the US. In fact, if you fail to honor some of these contracts, if you take a contract to actually build sort of a big ticket infrastructural program, and you fail to pay, you won't be taken to a Kenyan court. You'll be taken to the very same jurisdictions that came up with the warped governance systems of the multilateral trade and financial institutions. So the poorest nations now bankroll the richest. It's in fact this should make everybody angry, and the Gen Zs realize the injustice of this on their payslips, and not in these conferences or at a press conference. So eventually we need to go out there and actually make a mark. I had somebody talking about using their tennis shoes. I don't know whether they are Nike or Adidas, but it's due time we actually marched against this injustice. Because if you look at net interest developing countries paid on public debt in 2024, a record 10% on 2023. And if you speak about structural injustices, and when you hear about countries giving tax relief to large multinational institutions, whether they provide financial services, IT services. For instance, we are going to talk about our IT overloads when you talk about artificial intelligence, because right now we are looking at that industry sort of hitting about $48 trillion in terms of worth by 2033. So, for instance, if they give us 1% of that, that's, you can say, you know, in computing, that 1% is just a financial error. So if they give us just 1% of that to actually mitigate some of these issues we are talking about, we're talking about financing for education. If we got debt relief in the global south, we'd actually put 5 million more children through education. So when we talk about the real impact of this this debt, that's what we're talking about. People living in countries that now spend more on debt interest than on health or education, for instance. And then interest paid by the global south to mostly Western creditors, since I've actually talked about that. This is extraction by the not charity. And you know, interestingly, when I'm talking about the systematic, you know, what we call financial engineering, Africa actually loses about, when we say about relief in terms of relief in taxes, Africa loses about 86.6 billion annually on illicit financial flows. And basically that's people mining in these African countries and under declaring what, for instance, they've mined. If they're mining gold, if they're mining titanium, if you're mining best titanium, for instance, in this country, if they're mining, it could be copper in Zambia, because when you look at the expanse African continent, we are rich in mineral. They will under declare, so they will even pay less taxes. So we are not. I'm actually censoring myself, but we are not being impacted negatively only in terms of debt repayment, but also the resources they're actually getting from Africa. So Africa's external debt roughly doubled in 4 years. External debt service due from African countries in 2025, that is $89 billion. Money lost each year to illicit financial flows. That is 3.7 of Africa's of our GDP. That is for Kenya. Sorry, but if you look at 70% of Kenyan government revenue absorbed by debt service in 2024, 70%. You know, essentially, this is what I was talking about. Paying your landlord about 9 times of what you earn, even before you pay for your food. So, and the average Africa Eurobond yield is 9.8%, and then when you look at African countries spending more on debt service than on health. So, and if you look at Kenya, for instance, we carry, you know, it's one of the sharpest edge of the crisis, and we are going to look at the figures for Kenya progressively, and I want to move fast because we have quite a number of things that we are going to go through. But so we have 3 principal asks in terms of the fiscal space. So we are talking about a borrowers forum. Imagine now you're walking into the IMF, but you walk alone. Kenya walks alone. They are given their preconditions. Then they walk out. Uganda walks in alone. And then they are given the preconditions and they walk out. And then Tanzania does the same thing. And there's a difference between when you come together and actually you walk in as the entire African continent. So you know, in fact, this reminds me, for the longest time, I was consulting for the International Trade Center on the implementation of Africa Free Continental Trade Area. And one of the things that actually, you know, the challenge we face is that we don't speak in one voice. So if you want to travel to Tanzania, passport ni tofauti. If you want to travel to Uganda, a different passport, different tariffs. And when you look at the European Union, they have actually aligned the operations that they use. Same passport, same visa, same debt structures. So if we have a borrowers forum, which with a permanent platform proposed at Seville and backed by Zambia, Egypt, Spain, and the G20. So give data nations peer learning, technical muscles, and collective bargaining power, instead of actually going in one by one to the IMF, to Paris Club, to other Bretton Woods institutions. Then automatic debt service poses. We're speaking about, I remember the COVID-19 crisis. And honestly, this takes me back to something I think I will let Dr. Kenyanjui talk about it in depth, about pubs. You know, we are the ones who give the pathogens to actually create vaccines for some of these, illnesses. And at the same time, when they manufacture the vaccines, we are the last ones to get, and we are given a very small portion. and in fact, the wonders of nature, or how God works in a miraculous way. Because if you look at the mortality rate and how you are affected by COVID vis-a-vis the global north, so why can they do debt pauses, for instance, if a country in the global south has a pandemic or a disaster, so that they can actually first of all deal with that disaster. An example, for instance, would be the recent earthquake in Venezuela. So imagine asking Venezuela to continue paying their debt as they have been doing when they have lost most of their basic infrastructure from the earthquake, and people have died and all that. Then I was talking about the 1% global AI levy. The AI market actually is actually tipped to balloon to that amount. And I got those figures wrong. It's 4.8 trillion by 2033. And I don't know whether you watched recently when Elon Musk became the first trillionaire in dollars. not in Zimbabwe, not in Zimbabwean dollars. We're talking about US dollars. So when you look at that amount, and we and in light of the fact that when you talk about the what do you call it, the servers and everything involved in actually running artificial intelligence, which it's close to my heart, but at the end of the day, we are spending a lot on energy, water, and this is energy and water meant to actually go to basic needs of people in different communities. So if they just give us 1%, wouldn't break their banks. So for Kenyan debt, that is why the queue is longer and the payslip lighter. And I was talking about Gen Z, how they learned about the injustice of this debt, because if you're paying 70% of your budget to, so you can see a situation here, public debt across the mark for the first time in May 2026. That is 13 trillion. Then debt service as a share of GDP at March 2026. Basically, that's you round off, that is 70%. Then how much more Kenya pays creditor than he spends on his own health system? 9 times. Huh? So Kenya is neither in default or safe. A lower middle economy is paying 9 times to creditors than its hospitals. I'm glad that there are other key speakers here that will bring this closer home, and I'm only dealing with the numbers because the numbers are really, and the CSOs in this room actually know the lived realities and the impact this has. Because when you go to a level 5 hospital and you have no access to medication, or when you take, for instance, our generation right now is when we are taking care of our parents, and perhaps the medication is out of reach. You break the bank. In fact, I saw a survey that was done recently by, I think it was reported in the Business Daily, and most of the loans that are being taken in circles are for medical purposes. So these, we are not talking about numbers only. We are actually talking about things that actually affect us. So 42% of total receipts, Kenya shilling 1.35 trillion in terms of these are figures from the controller of budget went to debt service. And then I talked about this. I'm not gonna belabor on this, but Kenya raised. I told you about borrowing Fuliza, borrowing M-Pesa to pay Fuliza, and it's a chain that that goes on in continuity. If I've seen stories and I've read stories when politicians were campaigning on the platform of on the platform of getting people deregistered from, what do we call it, when you take a loan and then you are listed CRB. They were doing that because we have gotten to a point whereby we have cases of suicide, because people, you borrow Tom to pay Paul, and it becomes a cycle. So you pay this, then you. So in fact, to give you that's basically where Kenya is at the moment. So package as so if Kenya has already taken this argument to the streets, and we all know what happened and what has been happening in regard to the finance bill. Even protesters stormed parliament, dozens died. In March 2025, the fund declined. The 9th review, the program lapsed. And this is what I was telling you about the IMF, actually. And if you look at the representation of the global south, of African countries at the IMF, ni kama hakuna. So it's basically a members club. Nyinyi ni wageni mmekuwa invited. So they can make. So when we talk about governance structures that were actually instituted in the 80s, and they still operate with those governance structures, so unfortunate. So moving forward swiftly. So why a Kenyan voice anchors the global campaign? The East African anchor, a country neither in default nor safe. The campaign's clearest illustration of the bind facing lower middle income states. And in fact, I don't know who followed closely what was happening in Ghana, I hope we don't go the Ghana way, or even other countries that actually defaulted. And then we are going to hold a flagship conference on this, and in fact, going forward as one of the activities that perhaps in the breakup sessions. Participating on this in one of these in some of these forums will be critical. Then every theme, one country, IMF and the World Bank programs, Chinese SGR lending, Eurobond exposure, illicit financial flow. So this is not something happening in Kenya alone. It's not unique to Kenya. So, and then digital fast-paced Gen Z's playbook, X spaces. We need to be in these spaces and actually dominate these spaces in terms of advocacy and making this message heard loud and clear. So, I've talked about a lot about the multilateral trade institutions and the Bretton Woods institution, but let's not forget about, we still owe other, nation states like China, Africa's largest single bilateral lender, restructuring case by case, because we know how much we took to actually build the SGR. Then these guys, the private institutions, I call them the freeloaders. More when you take credit. Countries in the developed world pays way much less, and and these guys will never give you debt relief. Even as we speak about debt relief perhaps would happen with the World Bank, IMF, but don't expect any debt relief from those private institutions. So debt is only half the leak, and we half the leak because when we speak about taxation, and I sometimes it's very painful when you when you look at the, you know, we need to be at the table when we're speaking about tax relief for some of these you know, large organizations. When we are speaking about for instance, the example I was giving you about mining. For instance, recently you saw we have an agreement with the US in terms of mining of rare earths. And I remember there is a late MP who once told me something very interesting, that when you look at the declared mining of base titanium, and they had done some research and looked at via satellite the movement of trucks carrying, you know, some of these minerals vis-a-vis how much is declared, and you can know a truck via tonnage. So if one truck is carrying this amount of, for instance, a particular tonnage, over time, if you look via satellite and you see how many trucks have moved, you can actually calculate how much minerals have been extracted. Then you look at what has been declared in terms of exports, and it's way much less. We're talking about sometimes even 50% less or even 70% less. And then, of course, it means we are losing the minerals and we are losing the tax. So that is what I'm talking about, illicit financial flows. Because financial flows can have, money can flow out of a country in different ways. It doesn't have to be, the currency itself. It can be through, services. For instance, where multinationals actually declare that they are paying. For, let's say I'll give you an example of artificial intelligence and something called data labeling. You'll have a company declaring that they are paying their managers, their CEOs, a lot of money as consultants who are seated outside the country. Yet all the work is being done in the country. So they declare that money as an expense. So when they are declaring their profits, they subtract that, and that's one of the gaps in illicit financial flows. So we have quite a number of leaks, and two leaks that feed each other: revenue leaks out, illicit financial flows, misinvoicing, like I was giving you an example, money laundering, the missing revenue forces, deficits widen, governments to borrow to fill the hole, yet money is flowing out. In fact, interestingly, when I talked about 86.6 loss annually in illicit financial flows, Africa at the same time pays about $89 billion, almost equivalent annually, servicing debt. So it's actually sometimes also, as we also speak about these multilateral trade institutions and our global creditors in the global north, we should also, that song by Sauti Sol called Tujiangalie. Kujiangalia pia, in terms of, because some of these structural inadequacies start here at home by the bills passed in the August House. So gaps plugged with expensive opaque borrowing at the Africa premium. Like I said, we are paying a premium for our debts. Then enforcement starved. Debt service crowds out revenue authorities, and courts. So the leaks widened. So I had spoken about where sorry, I have spoken about where which jurisdictions some of these issues are decided in regard to borrowing and repayment. So this is very critical to our day-to-day and what the rest of the team is going to present and speak about. And you know, these are the numbers that are very critical. These are not numbers, and you know, it's good to show scale and magnitude. In fact, being a financial journalist, that's what you're told to do in terms of you know, lead with figures, statistics. Statistics show scale, but these are not statistics. These are lives of people. We would actually put 5 million more children in school if we got debt relief, for instance. We would build more clinics, more maternal and child lives saved in lower income countries. So I would actually leave this to the rest of the team to actually also, you know, canvas the whole conversation. So the decades of partial wins and an open door at service. So one of the reasons why we are doing this is that, you know, some of the promises that come from these nations, you know, wealthy nations, they really live up to them. And that's why this campaign is very, very critical. So when they are actually the ones shaping the agenda, they will work with targets that they know that they won't meet. And when we talk about even suspensions, they will do them at their own whims. And so we need to be the ones leading the agenda and framing the agenda, as opposed to waiting for them to frame the agenda for us. So I will not belabor this, but interestingly, one of the proposals that we have, and going forward we'll actually discuss it in depth, is having a debt barometer where we can actually start with the East African region, showing over time how, you know, the debt structure is progressing, and payment, and but you can see that we are all in the same we're all in the same boat. You can see Zambia, Ghana, Ethiopia, Chad. Reverse flow story, poor countries
And in mind, I have this picture of a young lady, a mother, somewhere in either Kisumu or Lamu or Kiambu, wherever it is. And she has walked a long distance seeking care for her young child. Get to the hospital, and she cannot access treatment because she has no money to pay what is required. And maybe in another place, she could not find the vaccine. Even when it's supposed to be free, the vaccine was out of stock. And that risks not only her, but her child, current health status, and future. We know polio can paralyze a child. We know there are many vaccine preventable that kill our children before the age 5. And this mother has struggled this time. Why is the medicine not available? Or why is the vaccine not available? Because the country has not been able to pay its share for the supply of this life-saving medication. Take another step and look at a person who has traveled many kilometers seeking care in a county level hospital and found an outpatient where one clinical officer is forced by circumstance to see 150 or more people in a day, and they have barely 5 minutes to see each of these persons. What's the chance they are going to get the correct diagnosis? Very limited. Therefore, the treatment given, the lab tests done, they will unlikely be able to help this person, and this person may need to come to the hospital again and again. So debt is impoverishing our very people. While we agreed to repay the debt, I don't think there is any government that agreed to repay the debt by the human lives of their citizens. The arithmetic of this injustice is that, for example, Kenya is spending 70% of the available budget to repay the debt. 30% is not sufficient to meet our social obligations, protect this country internally and from external aggression. And therefore, what is the easiest thing to be sacrificed? The education of our children, the health of our population. The social safety nets that are supposed to be there, they are now no longer nets, they are holes through which families and individuals are falling through. And I'd like to look at the amount of debt that we are paying. Kenya is paying 9 times in debt what is investing in health. While we are paying 60, as an African state, we are spending 90 billion every year in paying debts. The external, official or external assistance is only 60 billion. In a sense, we are paying more than we are bringing in. When you add in the number of the amount of the money we are spending in lost revenue because of foreign countries, foreign-based companies, and are declaring their income, we are losing out another 88 billion. So in a sense, Africa is losing about 170 billion while only getting ODA of 60 billion. So in a sense, as a country, as a continent, we are financing and subsidizing life in the richest countries. This is not a mistake. It's systematically designed like that. Basically, while it's called extraction, I'd like us to name it by the correct term. We are getting looted. So let's bring these numbers home. You can imagine the days, like in Kenya, I think there is one of the ARV drugs, TAPLD, is still out of stock. And a lot of the people here understand that personally, that they are missing the medication. HIV testing is not something you can walk to a facility today and get tested. Why? The test kits are short and we have to rush on them. unless you're pregnant, unless you can prove your sexual partner is HIV positive, or we have evidence of a broken condom. How is that possible? You will not be tested because you are considered low risk, unless you also an MSM of other key population like female sex workers, you will not be tested. Why? Because the test kits are being rationed. Condoms are no longer on the counter. They are no longer available to our most vulnerable population, young people after high school, in colleges and in other informal settlement. Yet we know condom is actually the best in prevention of HIV and STIs. The current sovereign debt system is unjust and an immoral regime of wealth extraction. Poor nations are funding the wealthier ones, and the cost is measured in human lives and well-being lost. The system is designed to extract all institutions, not without an exception. Borrowing from IMF, from World Bank, from other networks out there, private lenders, and China, they are all designed to extract. They seem to us, they look like colonialism disguised as lending. They have lenders clubs. Why don't we have borrowers clubs? We remember that any country walking into that borrowers club is like one goat headed into a pack of wolves' coat seeking justice. The only way we can have justice is to have borrowers club where it's negotiated collectively and what is agreed upon is implemented for all borrowers. We also know that the credit ratings are not from Global South, and the credit rating are used as another tool to increase the rates, interest rates that are saddled with the loans that come to Africa and other Global South countries. So now I'll turn to our demands. I'll not call them an ask, they are demands. We are operating in a lending and borrowing system that has no reliable referee. And therefore, the operationalization of the borrowers forum is extremely important so that the borrowers also have a fair share in the decision making to avoid the frustration that we are seeing. Bring it down to our country and our community level. We are seeing frustration because social services are broken. Many of us know what is happening in this country with schools burning left, right, and center. Have we asked ourselves why? The students are living in very horrible situations because the government cannot meet the necessities. They cannot expand facilities in tandem with the number of students who are going to those schools. And therefore, well, most of us who are gray hair now here, while in school, we had one bed per student. The next generation went to double decker. The next generation, I think they were in triple decker. And now some schools have actually 4 deckers, 4 students on one bed. Some of the corridors that we used to use for ironing and other things have become bedrooms too. All this has come down to the debt because the government has no physical space to meet this social and vital for our growth of the country. The second demand is that we have a mandatory debt service post. During COVID, several countries were in distress, and some of them, like Zambia and Ghana, went into, they could no longer pay their debt. We should have mandatory automatic interest-free posts in the public, during public emergencies, We know like DRC now is fighting with Ebola and all other things. And as a result, the country may need to focus all its resources and energies in solving the crisis, this human crisis. This is a human right, and not providing for it is a human right violation. Third, we know the AI is already a big industry, benefiting predominantly the richest nation and corporations. I've heard a lot of people talk about 1% AI solidarity levy would be beneficial. And I ask, why should we ask for 1%? Is 5% too much to us? A civil society meeting here in Nairobi today, we demand 5%. 5% will be able, over the time, to right the wrongs that have been done. We know that AI will also accelerate the losses of jobs, and as a result, may worsen the current situation. We have many young people, educated, productive, but they are being robbed of job by this mechanism. It is not wrong to demand that 5% be set aside for debt relief and to help countries even pay up their loans. Our request to everybody present, and especially the members of the fourth estate, and each one of us, because we have social media handles, is to get this message out now and keep the momentum going. We need our fellow people in the Western countries. They are blood, muscles, and spirit like we are. They understand that every mother, what they want for their children is a bright future, is access to health. We want them to feel what we're feeling, because most of the time, these lenders do not provide the correct picture in their own countries. And social media and all other media approaches will help us to get this message home where it needs to be heard. The unfair lending mechanism needs to stop. The unfair interests that are saddled to African countries need to stop. The institutions that rate countries need to be fairer than what they've been saddled the countries. I think some of the countries being called middle-income countries is also unfair, because what it does, it gets them off the safety nets that are beneficial to our people. Those rates need to be, the classification need to be objective and fair. Finally, we also need to raise to the AU to form a coalition to be able to negotiate on behalf of the African countries. I want to stop there because my fellow panelists may have words they also want to add to this discussion. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.
Before we do that, can we shoot our questions to you, and then it will be open also to the audience?
That's okay.
My name is Trevor from ABC, and because I'm a journalist, I want you to substantiate your claim that medical test kits, HIV test kits, are being rationed. Where? Because this is not from NSDCC, not from the Ministry of Health. Just to help me understand better.
So thank you very much for your question. Kenya used to buy 11 million test kits per year. Now, we barely have about 4 million test kits per year. That huge drop means that we can no longer test everyone who walks in asking to be tested. We have approximately, I think like almost 1 million pregnant mothers a year, approximately. So out of the 4 million, you subtract the 1 million, because all pregnant mothers are tested. And by policy, they're supposed to be tested at least twice during pregnancy. So if that was to happen, another 1 million would go, and it would be left with 2 million. If you're to try to put in 2 million to meet the 11 million people who used to be tested? Will it be sufficient? I can clearly substantiate this by telling you to request, or we can share with you, the risk, the algorithm we use to decide who will be tested. And that is not designed by us, it's designed by the government. I cannot speak for the government, I'm not qualified to speak on their behalf, but I can tell you the practice is that, and I would like you as journalists, take a day or two and go to any of the public or mission hospital, any hospital, except private where you pay. You'll be asked those questions. And if you do not meet the criteria, you will not be tested. Don't take my word. Just go out and check it.
Dr. One for me, you alluded to the biases of the global rating agencies like Moody's.
Yes.
Some of the time they keep on fluctuating the ratings on countries on the global south.
Yes.
Kenya. But a short while ago, the leadership of this country called for an African-led rating agency. Is this going to be a recommendation? Is this something you're looking at as an umbrella body for civil society in Kenya?
Yes, that recommendation is good because an African-based rating, credit rating organization will take in cognizance and the factors in Africa. We expect it to be fair. And the fairest would be what the others are saying and what is the African will say. We can get an average. The other thing, as I alluded to, is the issue that the commodities being sold in various markets in the world by the same manufacturer, even pharmaceutical, they'll have a different price in Europe, a different price in the US, a different price in Asia, and different price in Africa. Even Africa, the prices through the different countries are different. And the poorer the country, the more expensive the commodity is. This is what we are calling systematically designed to keep the poor poorer. These words I'm saying, I'd like you to confirm. There are journalists who can do some research here. Call somebody in Uganda and ask them to, what does the following medicine or this type of things that are imported cost? Call another country, call Malawi, call South Africa, and you find that the prices will be inversely proportional to the poverty, the weakness of the country's economy.
I have one question. With this campaign failure from net, coupled with the reduced overseas donor assistance and the gaps that we have in our healthcare budget, what are some of maybe other ways that you as a civil society propose that we can take as a government to domestically mobilize resources to finance our health development? Since what we have, going by the budgets can only fund the current budget. That is one. Two, do we see private partnership, the PPP model that the government proposed for major infrastructures like roads, can be adopted in the healthcare space so that rich Kenyans and rich foundations can also come up, take projects, and those bankable projects can generate their revenue to pay themselves, like we are paying the highways and the bridges that the government is constructing.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'd like to start with the one about PPP. PPP, if they are properly designed and implemented, will reduce the pressure and the demand for future loans. But right now, this campaign is focusing on the current loans that we have and the pressure it has put on governments, squeezing the physical space into a situation where countries are not able to meet social requirement: education, health, social safety net for the country, and generating jobs for the growing population. And let me state here that this is not AHF Kenya per se. This campaign is being organized in 50 countries across the world, and would want us to lend our voices to this movement so that the lenders across the globe can feel the pressure and respond to the cry of the world, because this is not a Kenyan problem alone. This is a matter that's affecting more than 3.4 trillion people, billion people. That's approximately, maybe almost approximately 45% of the world population. I don't think it's something we can sweep under the carpet. And I think each one of you contributing in one way or another, you remember that you are in solidarity with 3.4 billion people. And predominantly, you know, these are from the marginalized population, where population is predominantly younger. And if we don't solve this one, is a spiral. It will never stop. And that's what Dr. Margaret said in her words, that we need to disrupt the current cycle. Otherwise, it's a feed-forward cycle that keeps growing bigger with time. It will not grow, it will not stop unless something happens.
My name is Gideon, British Treasury, Daily. I have two quick questions. Number one, according to the report which was presented during the presentation, the report states that there is about 89,000 billion dollars annually in just services, while receiving around 60 billion dollars in aid. What does this imbalance reveal about the current global financing system? Then the last question, in one of your demands, you are calling for borrowers forum conferences and projects against a 1% AI solidarity with the poverty of leaders. Could you explain how each of these proposals will be working in the next situation?
So thank you very much. The borrowers framework is something that has been endorsed even by G7. It's something that was discussed and agreed upon in a meeting in, I think in Spain, Sevilla. And it's the operationalization that's important, because if you, like an analogy that I gave, if you are in the bushes and you face a lion, you become lunch for the lion. But the group we are here, if we meet one lion, it will see danger and it will flee. And that's the borrowers club will become the bigger group that goes to negotiate on behalf of each one of us. So it will have voice, power, and influence that countries do not have against the lenders. The next thing, I said many people have been asking 1% from AI generated revenue, but meeting us here, this meeting here in Kenya, we are saying we want 5%. Because 5% will not make a big dent in their operation and their profitability, but it will disrupt the current burden that's the crisis in Africa and other developing countries.
Yes. Now on to our last question, so that we can give the panelists to actually move into the next session. There'll be breakout sessions, but for any journalist who wants a side interview, you can actually pull any of the panelists aside for an interview.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I just didn't want us to be sidetracked to go to in country. I want us to focus our energies and all that we have right now to look at what has led us here. It has not been our domestic resource, because if you keep debt keeps ballooning. It doesn't matter what we have. There's a saying that you cannot lift yourself if you're in the bucket. And collecting domestic resources like we're still in the bucket. We have to find a way to get out of the bucket. We have to find a way out of the hole. And we must need to stop digging. How do we stop digging? By getting fair loans, by getting longer structured period that can allow us not to disrupt our economy, by ensuring that we are getting fair treatment. We are not getting 10% loan when the rich countries are borrowing from each other at 1 or 2%. And we also need to look at the issue of capital flight in our continent, where multinationals are under-declaring their profits, their income, and the amount of the money that is estimated to be lost by Africa is equivalent to the amount of the money that we are paying in debt. So it's like we're being charged twice, one officially and another one underhand. I think those are the three areas that we need to work on: the interest, properly structured, pause in repayment during crisis, and that we deal with the issue of the lost revenue through multinationals. That can get us out of the hole.
All right, maybe allow any of the others,
Yeah.
especially a lady, to respond to.
Oh, I'm not a lady, but I want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that's okay. So for us to move quickly.
No, ladies will come back
Yeah,
to me.
please,
Yeah.
please let me shoot this. And
Yeah,
then
so-
you
so,
can respond.
as
I'm
I-
asking, my question is, how 88 billion shillings in lost illicit financial flows, Kenya, of course, a very big percentage in that as well. You're talking about multilateral, whatever, these lenders. Is it us is it them to monitor and make sure that if we borrowed for development, they pursue and make sure that it has been utilized in development? Or is it our collective effort as a country, as citizens, since we are a sovereign country, to ensure that if the money was borrowed, then we ensure that it's put into the right use?
Yeah, that question will be responded to by a lady based on based on your preference. But I want to echo what Dr. Kinyanjui has talked about.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Nelson Otuma. I work at NEFAC, which is a network of people living with HIV, and I approach this from the health and HIV subsector. And we just came from the high-level meeting, UN high-level meeting. One of the indicators that was passed in the UN high-level meeting in New York last week is 100% sustainability. And that means our country, a country like Kenya, must now be in charge of their HIV response and in charge of their health. This is not going to happen in a country where 70% of revenue goes to service external debt. And this is not going to happen in a country where the money that is being spent on debt is more than the money that is going for hospitals. The money that is being going outside there is undermining the capacity of this country to invest into health. And therefore, like the question around where's the evidence that test kits are not available, I think all of us can pose as mystery clients and go to a facility and we'll confirm that. The whole prevention program for HIV is collapsing, and it's collapsing because there are no resources, and resources is what we are discussing here as something that is earmarked for servicing debts. Now, the call is simply that the regime at the global level is unfair and very exploitative to our countries, even in terms of interest, and that is what needs to be looked at. So even as we are urging our country to go slow in external borrowing, we are also telling the international community and the borrowers to put considerations in place not to impoverize and to make countries not to afford the healthcare and the education, because they are making people poor, and they are making people poorer, and they are making sick people even sicker, because now there is no investment. They are taking all the money that was meant for healthcare workers, and we are talking also talking about human resources, and we are lacking resources as a country to put in that, and that's why we are here calling on the international community and the borrowers particularly to look, the lenders particularly to look at the rules, including the interest they charge in this money. And that's why Dr. Kinyanjui said the African Union also need to come in to support their nations, their poor nations, in bargaining some of these conditions. And when they are going for other bargains, let them also carry the African CDC. They will help them look at technical issues, and then the African Union can deal with the political issues. Now, the lady can come and respond to your question, so that we don't move this. It's you to move here.
Okay. My name is Evelyn Kibuchi from Stop to Be Partnership Kenya. I'm going to respond to the question you've asked about who is responsible to ensure that the money we borrow or the resources we borrow are put into good use. The relationship between the lender and borrower is purely business. That's why there's interest. Even when you borrow a loan from a bank, the bank has no business with what you do with the money. Their business is that you're able to pay the money within the stipulated period. And that's why we are saying it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that the monies they borrow are put into good use. They are put into responsible use, are used to improve the welfare of the Kenyans. And that's why we are demanding a civil society that we need to be involved in all the entire processes of borrowing the loan, the implementation of the loan, and holding the government to account to ensure that the money is used for the rightful use that it was borrowed. And this cannot happen if we are not involved from the discussion between, even the discussion in the other country level, where the decision is made that we need to borrow this amount of loan. We need to be involved where that discussion between the lender and the borrower are there, so that we know what are the terms that this loan is being given. What is the duration that we are supposed to pay within? What is this money being borrowed for? And as a country, are we able to pay for it? We also need to be involved in monitoring how that loan has been used. And we also have to monitor to ensure that in actual fact, at the end of the day, it has impacted positively on the life of Kenyans. And I also want to add a word on bringing the health aspect. Recently, you all know that the US government reduced or almost cut the amount that they were investing in our health systems. What did that mean? That now we have to take the responsibility of taking care of our health systems. Where do we get that money if we are not expanding our revenue base? One of the solutions we have is to ensure that what we have already borrowed has been put in strengthening the healthcare system. And at the end of the day, if we are able to put the loans into the right use, we are going to reduce sickness, we are going to improve access to food security, we are going to improve our education, and these are the main functions of development. And when we get them right, then we reduce our borrowing. So include civil society in the loan processes.
One more. I wanted to add on that as civil society, we demand that we also have a debt register that is public. We should not be going around sniffing, looking for information. Right to information is a right in this country by constitution. Why is information about public debt, not individual debt, public debt, still hidden? We need to have a debt register so that it's easy to know this debt taken from this lender at this rate for this purpose. Then it's even easier for the civil society, no Kenyans in general, to confirm whether the bridge that was supposed to be put in your neighborhood, was it put up? The road that was announced in this another place, was the road done? So that it's easier even for the voter to put their member of parliament or the MC or their governor into their defense when telling them, you already got the money, where is the project? I think that will also help so that we, as Kenyans, we also don't put pressure necessarily to a government that already has no physical space. Yes. So the demand are based on facts. Yes. Thank you very much.
Let me just one. Can I?
Yes. Come on, make it brief. No, see it. Oh, come on.
Okay. I just want to add that we have been taking loans. My name is James Kamau from Kenya Treatment Access Movement. KETAM, CEO. Kenya has been taking loans. For them to pay the 70%, they've been taking loans left, right, and center. For example, there was this road that was opened yesterday in Dagoretti, the junction, which cost 3.8 billion. And it was 255 meters. So it was 15 million per meter. And it is a loan. So the question is, are we privatizing our needs? The second thing we need to know is that there's a big campaign on SHA, especially from MOH and the others. But is it working? No. They claim there are 36 million people registered, but only 4.4 million people are the ones actively paying. The other part, which is supposed to be paid by public health and the one of social, critical illness, and it's also supposed to be paid by government and chronic. It is not there. Yesterday, you are journalists, you saw how much the government owes the hospitals. Are you getting the whole situation? So I think that is something we need to do. And then lastly, Kenya's GDP is $147. It is the 7th largest economy in Africa. So the question is, will the donor community be willing to come and put money there, or it will put money somewhere else? So I think we need to sit on the table, negotiate with this, and make sure that these loans that are signed without public participation are put into place.
Could I say something?
Yes.
Sorry. Sorry. Since we are two ladies. So I just wanted to speak to the question that was asked about. Sorry. My name is Dr. Margaret Lubale, the Executive Director of Health NGOs Network, popularly known as HENET. I just wanted to respond to a question that was asked about who is responsible for tracking and monitoring debt. And I just wanted to take us back to the voting of the finance bill. If our legislators do not make the connection between what the debt crisis is and passing of such important bills that they can avoid that, it means that then the citizenry has to take a bigger role. And one of the opportunities we have is the bulging youth population, popularly known as the Gen Z, and I think capacity building and sensitization of that youth population to the realities of where we find ourselves as a country is very important. And so that we are able to push for accountability. You know, for instance, if your MP was not in parliament on that day, what does that say about where he places the priorities of his own county. And so for us, the issue is that if one party is failing in monitoring, then the citizenry, unfortunately or fortunately, have to come up. But that means that there is a big role for CSOs to play in building the conscience of the populace or the citizenry to understand the dimensions of debt, the implications of debt, and how to make the connections with what is failing in their daily life and what is happening at the macroeconomic level. I think the second thing that we talked about is that we are moving into an election period. And I think for us, as CSOs, if we were to develop a manifesto, what I think my colleague called a citizens manifesto, that speaks to what we desire to see in terms of our own debt restructuring, and then demanding from every party that is coming onto the ballot to tell us what their response to our manifesto is. And then whoever goes in, then we hold them accountable to what they put in their manifesto. I think for us, those are some of the things we are looking at. It could even serve as a blueprint for other countries, because Kenya really is a pioneer in terms of, beautiful policies and stellar guidelines. We can use that as a blueprint to be replicated by other countries. And so we want to be proactive as well. And so we are saying that we will no longer take a back seat, when things are being signed, yet we are the ones to pay the bill. Thank you.